Across the vast expanse of the galaxy stretched an empire so old and mighty that entire civilizations had risen and perished within its borders without ever glimpsing its end. Worlds were bound together by luminous trade routes, fleets that cut through space like veins of light, and the singular authority of the Emperor, whose rule was both feared and revered. To speak his name was to invoke stability. To imagine his throne was to envision eternity. For centuries, he had presided over peace and order, elevated not just by power but by the belief that he embodied the unshakable heart of the galaxy. Yet even the most immortal-seeming figures are subject to the frailty of flesh, and in that truth, the empire would soon tremble. The first whispers of illness were dismissed as court gossip. The emperor, they said, was as unyielding as the star he was enthroned under. But whispers grew into murmurs, and murmurs into frantic proclamations. The emperor could no longer walk unassisted. His once thunderous voice grew hoarse, his eyes clouded with fatigue. Imperial physicians from every corner of the empire were summoned. They wielded instruments that could unravel genomes in the blink of an eye, devices that could rebuild failing organs at a cellular level. Yet their findings converged into a single chilling truth. They did not understand the ailment. It progressed beyond their comprehension, eating at the emperor's vitality with a rhythm none of their machines could decode. Panic, the silent predator of great empires, slithered into the court. Nobles and warlords exchanged wary glances. The emperor's throne had long been a source of unassailable stability, yet the question of succession now hung over them like a guillotine. No heir had been designated. Rivals eyed the vacant possibility with hunger thinly veiled as concern. Every day the emperor's breath grew shallower, and every day the great houses whispered louder of what might follow his passing. To prevent disintegration, the Council of the Great Species was summoned. They were the guardians and pillars of the empire, towering reptilian strategists, crystalline beings whose thoughts flickered in luminous patterns, and ancient winged scholars whose lifespan spanned millennia. They gathered in the Hall of Concord, their forms casting strange and daunting silhouettes across the chamber walls. For once, their rivalry was subdued by a shared fear. If the emperor perished, the empire could unravel in blood and fire. Each species brought forth their finest healers. They examined the emperor with diligence, some relying on neural symphonies that sang through the body's hidden layers, others using nanoscopic colonies to trace the veins of life. Yet all returned with the same defeated expression. No known method could cure him. Each attempt, however sophisticated, ended in failure. And failure in the court of the emperor was not merely professional ruin but a stain upon one's civilization. To be remembered as the species that failed the emperor was a dishonor no race was willing to bear. The council erupted into argument. Some demanded that attempts cease, lest reckless trials end the emperor's life prematurely. Others pressed that they must keep searching, for if the emperor died naturally under their watch, the stain would be worse. Voices clashed, pride and fear intertwining. None wanted to risk their own standing, yet none could bear to be seen as cowards. It was a paralysis of grandeur. The empire's most advanced beings, trapped in inaction by the weight of their own reputations. Amid this storm of voices, a suggestion emerged almost as mockery. A delegate, desperate for any option, muttered the name of a species so insignificant within the empire that many considered them little more than curiosities. Humans, a minor protectorate from a fringe spiral arm. Primitive, fragile, their lifespans laughably short compared to the ancients in the hall. Their technology was a fraction of the empire's, their fleets modest, their medicine crude. They were known for patchwork solutions, for cutting into flesh to heal rather than rewriting genomes. To most of the council, it was an absurdity unworthy of breath. The laughter came swiftly. The crystalline beings pulsed with mocking light. The reptilian warlords hissed derision, and the scholars shook their feathered heads. The idea that humans of all species could succeed where the empire's titans had failed was preposterous. They were the Empire's youngest children, still stumbling through the corridors of advancement. What could they possibly offer the Emperor except amateur fumbling? Yet in the rhythm of derision there was also unease. Desperation had a way of softening even the most arrogant minds. The Emperor's condition deteriorated daily. His chest rose and fell like a weakening tide. His advisors knew he could not endure long without intervention. No other species was willing to risk their honor by taking responsibility. And so the suggestion of humanity, first dismissed with scorn, lingered in the chamber like a stubborn echo. Debate raged. Some argued that involving humans would be an insult to the Emperor, exposing him to the hands of primitives. Others countered that precisely because humans were considered insignificant, their failure would bear no weight on the Empire's great houses. If they succeeded, unlikely as that was, the Emperor would live, and credit could be claimed by those who had allowed their participation. The calculus of politics twisted what had once seemed absurd into something strangely convenient. The Emperor's personal aides, faces carved with desperation, pressed the council to act. The Emperor's life could not wait for endless debate. It was decreed, not out of faith but out of expedience, that humans would be summoned. They would be granted access not because the council believed in them, but because they were expendable. If they failed, the Empire lost nothing of value. If by some miracle they succeeded, the Emperor would be restored and the great races would still hold their dignity. And so the message was sent across the stars, a summons to Earth. The humans who answered were not emperors of medicine, not wielders of technologies that bent matter and time. They were physicians, scientists, men and women accustomed to improvisation, to making do with little, to finding solutions in scarcity. They embarked not with fleets but with humble vessels, carrying their knowledge and determination as their only weapons against an ailment that had defeated the galaxy's most revered minds. When they arrived at the Emperor's court, they stepped into a hall filled with skepticism and disdain. The towering reptilian strategists gazed down with contempt. The crystalline beings flashed derisive patterns, and the ancient scholars whispered among their wings. The humans, small and fragile in comparison, looked more like supplicants than saviors. Some of the council openly scoffed at their tools, metal instruments and diagnostic methods that seemed laughably outdated compared to nanite clouds and gene scanners. Yet the humans did not shrink from the scorn. They observed quietly, their eyes steady. They had not come to win respect, they had come to try. In the silent pause that followed their arrival, the weight of the Empire's arrogance bore down upon them, but still they stood. Where other species had recoiled from the risk of dishonor, the humans accepted it. Where others had measured worth in pride and legacy, the humans measured it in life and death. The Emperor lay frail upon his throne, each breath a shallow struggle. The court held its breath as the humans approached. Many waited for them to stumble, to prove themselves unworthy, to justify the laughter that had greeted their mention. But as the humans prepared to begin, a silence fell over the chamber, sharp and tense. For the first time in living memory, the Empire watched not its own champions, but its least regarded children, step forward to bear the weight of its survival. And in that silence, no one yet realized the truth that history would one day record. That when the Emperor's life was on the line, and all the proud guardians of the Empire faltered, only humans found the courage to act. The humans walked into the Emperor's chamber under the weight of countless stares, their every step measured against the expectations of a galaxy that had already judged them unworthy. They were given quarters far removed from the central halls, a subtle reminder that their presence was tolerated but not respected. Supplies were limited, access to imperial medical archives denied under the guise of security. Where other species would have demanded tools of unimaginable precision, the humans unpacked modest cases. Stethoscopes, microscopes, chemical analyzers, and computers that seemed almost laughably simple in contrast to the Empire's living machines. To the Council, it was a theater of futility. To the humans, it was the beginning. They began with observation. Where others had relied on machines to interpret data, the humans listened, measured, recorded, and drew patterns with their own eyes. They touched the emperor's skin, noted its pallor and temperature shifts. They watched the rhythm of his breathing, cataloged the tremors of his hands, and dissected the subtle ways fatigue tightened his muscles. Their approach was slow, methodical, human. To the onlookers, it looked like ignorance. To the humans, it was the art of building understanding from fragments. The emperor's health declined further with each passing cycle. His chest heaved with effort, his eyes dimmed, his voice reduced to whispers no louder than rustling cloth. The alien nobles grew restless, urging that the experiment be ended before humiliation became unbearable. Yet the humans remained steady, their focus unshaken by ridicule. They spoke in hushed voices among themselves, crafting hypotheses, testing samples of blood with their primitive methods, extracting details from the simplest indicators. Where others saw desperation, they saw a puzzle. It was then that resistance within the court sharpened into hostility. Some factions had no desire to see the emperor restored. Power was a hunger that thrived in shadow, and the emperor's illness was a doorway. These factions began to sabotage. Instructions were misplaced, supplies delayed, rumors planted. Whispers spread that the humans were butchers who cut flesh with knives, that their touch carried infection, that their persistence was cruelty disguised as treatment. Yet even as distrust thickened around them, the humans pressed on. They documented, tested, argued late into the hours of night, relentless against the Empire's disdain. The first real breakthrough came not from advanced scanners but from a careful pattern in blood chemistry. The humans noticed fluctuations in markers that resembled immune response, but did not align with any natural pathogen. Their conclusion was dangerous. The Emperor's condition was not random disease, but the consequence of deliberate poisoning. It was subtle, engineered to mimic decay, designed to elude the very machines upon which the Empire relied. The realization chilled them, for it meant they were not simply racing against an illness, but against those who profited from its continuation. When they presented their findings, the chamber erupted. Some denied the accusation outright, others accused the humans of fabricating lies to mask their incompetence. The humans responded not with outrage but with evidence. Sequences of data mapped by hand, samples stained and shown through simple optics, anomalies visible without the need for grand technology. Their case was clear, undeniable in its simplicity. A toxin was at work, and it was alien in origin. Despite proof, opposition persisted. Some factions demanded the humans be expelled, fearing their accusations would ignite political scandal. But the Emperor's closest aides, desperate and clinging to hope, shielded them. The humans were granted reluctant leave to continue, though now under constant scrutiny. Every step forward was a battle against both the toxin and the labyrinth of power. The humans adapted their strategy. They studied the toxin not as machines would, but as organisms battling survival. They tested it against their own biology, recognizing its mechanics by the ways it attacked cells. They realized that the Emperor's body lacked the adaptive ferocity that human immune systems had developed over millennia of struggle against countless pathogens. Where the Empire's great races had long since sterilized their environments, eliminating disease from their evolution, humanity had been shaped by adversity. Their bodies knew how to fight. The treatment they devised was daring, a serum based on human immune markers, extracted and refined to trigger a defensive reaction within the Emperor's system. To the Empire, it was barbaric, using the raw biology of another species as medicine was unheard of. But the humans were not guided by pride. They were guided by necessity. They explained their plan with calm certainty. The serum would give the Emperor's body the chance to resist the toxin instead of succumbing to it. The council erupted again, voices raised in outrage. It was unthinkable to mingle such primitive biology with the Emperor's. Yet as his breathing grew shallow, his skin gray, his pulse faint, there was no other choice. Opposition dwindled under the crushing weight of mortality. The humans were permitted to proceed, though their enemies lurked in every shadow, hoping for failure. They set to work in secrecy, improvising equipment from what little they had, building makeshift laboratories from borrowed scraps and their own ingenuity. They labored until exhaustion blurred their vision, until their hands trembled with fatigue. The Empire watched with disdain, yet could not look away. Here were creatures small, fragile, mocked for their crude methods, pouring everything into the survival of a ruler who was not theirs. When at last the serum was ready, they faced the Emperor with a quiet solemnity. He was unconscious, his breath shallow, life slipping with each moment. The humans administered the serum without ceremony, their voices steady though their hearts thundered. The chamber held its collective breath. Minutes passed, long and merciless. Then faintly the Emperor's chest rose with greater strength, his pulse steadied, his skin warmed. The room shifted from disbelief to awe. For the first time in countless days, hope rippled through the hall. Whispers passed from one noble to another. The humans may have succeeded. The laughter that once mocked them was replaced by silence heavy with unease. They had done what the Empire's greatest healers could not. The Emperor still lingered at the brink of death, but the tide had shifted. Life stirred where before there had only been decline. And though their victory was fragile, the humans did not allow themselves rest. They knew the toxin was not yet defeated, that the road ahead was steep. But for the first time, the galaxy could no longer dismiss them as irrelevant. In the quiet between breaths, the Empire saw what it had never expected: humanity's refusal to surrender. The first signs of recovery were fragile, a flicker of strength in the Emperor's chest, a steadier rhythm in his pulse. For a fleeting moment, hope dared to rise. But the toxin was cunning, engineered with precision, and soon it struck back with renewed ferocity. The Emperor's body convulsed in sudden spasms, his breath faltered, his skin grew clammy. The improvement crumbled like sand through fingers, and panic spread across the chamber. Many declared the humans had overstepped, that their crude intervention had worsened his suffering. Voices rose, calling for their expulsion. Yet the humans did not waver. They leaned closer, eyes fixed, minds racing, knowing they stood at the precipice of final failure or undeniable triumph. They worked with urgency, revising their calculations, analyzing every symptom with ruthless clarity. The serum had slowed the toxin but not destroyed it. It clung to the Emperor's blood like a parasite, adapting, resisting. Machines of the Empire could identify its patterns but not outmaneuver them. The humans, however, had no illusions of perfection. They embraced imperfection as their strength. They adjusted, modified, introduced variations of the serum drawn from their own resilience. Each iteration was a gamble, every adjustment a race against the fading pulse of the Emperor. In the court, enemies waited for collapse. Some even whispered of silencing the humans before they could stumble upon success. But every attempt at obstruction only fueled their determination. Guards loyal to the Emperor's aides shielded them from sabotage. Behind closed doors, the humans continued their desperate work, hands blistered, eyes bloodshot, driven by something alien to the Empire's ruling races. A refusal to quit, even when the outcome seemed impossible. Days blurred into nights, though time in the imperial halls was meaningless. The Emperor's body became the battlefield, every improvement countered by the toxin's resistance. At last, the humans realized that no treatment alone could succeed. They needed to trigger not just reaction, but transformation, to awaken the Emperor's body to fight with its own strength. So they turned to the most radical choice yet: grafting elements of human biology directly into the Emperor's system, not merely as serum but as living templates, urging his cells to learn, to adapt, to remember the way humans endured disease. The council exploded with outrage when the plan was revealed. To mingle human essence with the Emperor's was blasphemy to them, an insult against the purity of his line. Accusations of heresy, of sacrilege, echoed through the hall. Yet as the emperor slipped further into the shadow of death, the protests weakened. The alternative was not dishonor, but extinction of the throne. The humans were permitted to proceed, but under the glares of countless eyes, each waiting for catastrophe. They began the process with solemn care, introducing the graft slowly, ensuring compatibility, guiding the emperor's body as though coaxing a wounded beast back to its feet. Rejection threatened at every step, and still they pressed on. Hours stretched into eternity. Then, against all expectation, the emperor's system responded. His cells began to adapt, to mimic the resilience of their human donors. His breathing steadied, the toxin's grip loosened, and a spark of vitality returned to his eyes. When he opened them at last, the hall froze. His gaze, long clouded with weakness, now carried recognition. He saw the humans who had labored at his side, fragile figures dwarfed by the grandeur of the chamber. His lips parted, voice raspy but resolute, acknowledging them not as intruders but as saviors. The council fell silent, their arrogance shattered by the undeniable truth. The emperor lived because of them. The backlash was swift and venomous. Some nobles refused to accept the outcome, claiming the emperor's recovery was temporary, that humans had tainted him. They argued that history would judge this as degradation, not salvation. Others, humbled by what they had witnessed, bowed their heads, unable to deny the courage that had carried the humans through. The chamber fractured along lines of fear and awe, pride and gratitude. The emperor, though weak, commanded silence with a single raised hand. He spoke of the nights he had felt death closing in, the moments when he believed no force could pull him back, and how it was not the empire's greatest champions who stood by him, but the ones considered least. His words cut through the council like a blade stripping away excuses. He declared before all that humanity had saved not just his life, but the empire itself, for without his survival, chaos would have consumed them all. No one dared to challenge him directly. His decree was absolute. Humans would no longer be treated as lesser, no longer dismissed as primitive. Their courage had proven greater than the pride of ancient houses. Where others hesitated, they had acted. Where others feared failure, they embraced risk. In his words, the humans found a place within the empire not as subjects, but as contributors, their worth etched into history by the survival of the throne itself. For the humans, there was no celebration. They were exhausted, drained of strength, aware only that they had done what had to be done. They asked for nothing in return, for they had not come seeking glory. Yet their actions rippled outward. Across the empire, whispers began to spread of the small, fragile species who had defied the impossible. Some spoke of them as reckless, others as dangerous, but many began to see them as something more, a reminder of what true resolve looked like. The emperor's recovery was slow but steady. Each day he grew stronger, his presence once again anchoring the empire. And with each day, the story of the humans' defiance traveled further. They had not wielded the greatest machines, nor commanded vast fleets, nor carried ancient wisdom. They had simply refused to give up when all others had turned away. That refusal had changed the fate of a galaxy. As the humans prepared to depart, the emperor summoned them privately. His words were few but heavy with meaning. He thanked them not as ruler to subjects, but as one life to another, bound by gratitude beyond measure. He promised that their place in the empire would be honored, that their courage would be remembered long after the echoes of this crisis had faded. And so they left, returning to their distant world, unaware of how deeply they had altered the currents of history. The empire watched them go, some still with scorn, others with newfound respect, but all with acknowledgement. For when the emperor's life had hung by a thread, it was not the mighty guardians of the empire who stepped forward. It was humanity, unremarkable in stature yet unmatched in will, who bore the burden others feared. The legacy of that moment lingered, whispered in council chambers, carried on starships, taught in quiet corners of alien academies. It became a lesson etched into the memory of a galaxy, that greatness is not always born from power or knowledge, but from the refusal to let hope die. And so history recorded the truth in words simple and undeniable. When the emperor's life was on the line, only humans stepped up.